before movies sucked.
That's nice shooting, soldier!
Satire. One of the more difficult forms of comedy to perform, often misunderstood or misfiring completely in the execution, especially when the topic gets political, which is why Dr. Strangelove, with its whimsical subtitle, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, remains one of the all-time greats in the cinematic realm of comedies about the end of the world. Released in 1964 and directed by Stanley Kubrick, the movie is deliberately presented in black and white, providing no colorful distractions beyond the dialogue, which is crisp, sincere, and at its best, it is gleefully absurd. Satire works when the comedy is taken seriously.
They won't accept the call. Have you got 55 cents?
Well, you don't think I'd go into combat with loose change in my pocket, do you?
There are few things more serious than the two greatest political rivals of the time getting nudged ever closer to global nuclear oblivion by one overzealous general with just enough access and ambition to get a thing done. The story wastes no time, introducing us to an Air Force bomber flight crew as they receive a new encrypted message. Orders for a new mission. What's the mission? Well, let's give a little context for clarity. At the time this movie was made, the main political terror was the nuclear arsenal. We had a Cold War, meaning billions of dollars going into the manufacture of nuclear missiles with the intention of matching whatever amount our designated bad guys, in this case the Russians, might have in their own secret cave military bases. It didn't matter that we could destroy the world. What mattered was how many more times than the other guy we could turn the Earth into a lifeless, irradiated hell.
Cobalt thorium-G has a radioactive half-life of 93 years. If you take, say, 50 H-bombs in the 100 megaton range and jacket them with cobalt thorium-G, when they are exploded, they will produce a doomsday shroud, a lethal cloud of radioactivity which will encircle the Earth for 93 years.
Oh, what a load of commie bull.
And the U.S. was winning. But imagine that slim possibility that Russia pulled a fast one, launched a sneaky surprise attack that somehow got past our defenses and took out Washington, D.C. and other major U.S. targets. What if somehow the U.S. political leadership and military command were blasted off the playing field? What might happen to, say, our bombers patrolling our borders from the air? Wouldn't it make sense to have some sort of fail-safe measure where these bombers could receive one last order before the hypothetical surprise missile attack did its worst? And wouldn't it make even more sense for those bombers to be ordered to drop their own nuclear cargo on a designated target inside Russia? Sort of a final fuck you from all of the USA to Moscow. All it would take to send one or all of these bombers on such a mission is sending this encrypted code. Now imagine, and this is where the fun begins, imagine that there's a general who has access to those encryptions and the ability to send them. Go one further and imagine this general has become so consumed by his own paranoia and ideology that he sees a nuclear first strike sneak attack on Russia as the only reasonable solution to our, and therefore the world's, problems.
I can no longer sit back and allow communist infiltration, communist indoctrination, communist subversion, and the international communist conspiracy to sap and impurify all of our precious bodily fluids.
So the encrypted order goes out. The bombers are on their way. And now the U.S. has mere hours to try and stop the bombers and convince Russia that this was an accident, preventing global destruction over a little misunderstanding.
Now then, Dmitri, you know how we've always talked about the possibility of something going wrong with the bomb.
What follows is a delightfully funny, yet horribly terrifying examination of political diplomacy versus militant reasoning, both standing on ideological authority and squabbling over intentions, while a very real doomsday clock continues its relentless countdown.
The whole point of the doomsday machine is lost. If you keep it a secret, why didn't you tell the world, eh?
The problem isn't just U.S. versus Russia. It's the U.S. versus U.S. itself. On paper, that literally reads as us versus us, and the point is clear. The political posturing that provides the perceived need for a standing army feeds the military apparatus that bolsters politicians to strut and empowers them to dare other nations to try something. So, much like saying, why make a big meal if no one's coming over to eat? Brigadier General Jack Ripper, in an increasingly scary performance from Sterling Hayden, sends out his invitations to war, encouraging the rest of his reluctant government to join him as they toast the end of their enemy.
Hendrik, in the name of Her Majesty and the Continental Congress, come here and feed me this bellboy.
This is where I have to talk about Peter Sellers, who plays three very different, very distinct characters, each providing a particular moral as well as ideological perspective to the events as they unfold. The first is British military officer Group Captain Mandrake, who, to the benefit of the world despite his own misfortunes, learns of the general's orders early on. As things go, he figures out how to countermand the order and rushes to get that information where it needs to go before the bombs drop. And these were the days before the internet, email, cell phones, and all that digital technology complicating things so easily these days. Still, it's interesting to see different approaches to similar issues leading to the same problem.
No, I'm perfectly serious, operator. The President, yes, the President of the United States. Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't got enough change.
Which gets us to Peter Sellers as the President of the United States, Merkin Muffley. He's mild, deferential, wielding his authority like a beleaguered father left in charge of a junior's achievement field trip to the nation's capital.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
As the story plays out, we see how fitting that analogy becomes as the climate turns from quelling rivalries and seeking solutions to a solemn acceptance that, at the last, like it or not, we're all on this trip together. Which brings me to the third character portrayed by Peter Sellers, none other than the titular persona of Dr. Strangelove himself. This creepy, enigmatic man is neither a soldier nor is he a politician. He is referred to as a doctor, but his area of practice is unknown. He has several other peculiarities, but his knowledge and perspective on history and geopolitical influences make him valuable to governments and militaries alike. In fact, he was a member of the Nazi Party, but, like many other civilian academics, instead of facing prosecution, he was recruited to our side. In a few brief scenes, we see how his nihilistic, disparaging view of humanity feeds the paranoia of these politicians and soldiers, and for a very brief glimpse, the sane are allowed an understanding of how the end of the world can be warped into the perverted view of triumph.
Also, when they go down into the mine, everyone will still be alive. There will be no shocking memories, and the prevailing motion will be one of nostalgia for those left behind, combined with a spirit of bold curiosity for the adventure ahead.
From an acting perspective, it is astonishing to watch Peter Sellers so completely and convincingly play these three characters that their significance to the story almost becomes secondary. But I don't think it's an accident that his performances, when examined as one cohesive whole, are necessary to take us on a much larger journey. The journey begins with that of a soldier who is a believer in the military system, more for its bureaucratic and supportive services. But then this believer is confronted with this general and sees how the machine can be corrupted. Next, Peter Sellers portrays the supreme politician, the President of the United States, still full of ideology, but also full of understanding about political power and the moral implications of such a responsibility.
Fine, I can hear you now, Dmitri. Clear and plain and coming through fine. I'm coming through fine too, eh? Good, then. Well, then, as you say, we're both coming through fine. Good. Well, it's good that you're fine, then, and I'm fine. I agree with you. It's great to be fine.
And even so, the machinations of the system fail him. His responsibilities, regardless of morality, are forced upon him with the same efficiency as an emotionless mathematical equation. And finally, the apex of his performances, Dr. Strangelove, whose perverse, gleeful nihilism takes it all in and at the last revels in the completeness of mankind's self-destruction, evoking gestures and slogans from the dictatorship that allowed his academic theories to flourish. We see those nihilistic theories still well-nurtured, unhindered, and thriving in our own garden.
Of course, it would be absolutely vital that our top government and military men be included to foster and impart the required principles of leadership and tradition.
3 integral characters at 3 stages of the end of the world, and one man played them all. Other notable performances come from the stellar cast. In the bomber crew, you can see a young, fresh-faced James Earl Jones before he lent his voice to Darth Vader and made him the iconic villain of Star Wars. Here, he's a co-pilot helping deliver the bomb. Next, I have to mention Slim Pickens as Major King Kong.
1 issue of prophylactics, 3 lipsticks, 3 pair of nylon stockings. Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff.
The bomber pilot who refuses to let a few mechanical failures prevent him from doing his duty and delivering the bomb. This image was iconic until about the early turn of the millennium, when the U.S. was going to war with countries that had nothing to do with 9/11, but supposedly had a lot to do with other things that required our military to bomb them. This image was a little too on the nose for the boots-on-the-ground slogans going around at that time, and nobody really wants to be reminded of what images followed that either. It's no afterthought that I bring up George C. Scott last, as the idealistic General Buck Turgidson.
We were to immediately launch an all-out and coordinated attack on all their airfields and missile bases. We'd stand a damn good chance of catching them with their pants down.
He's at the top of his game, yet his enthusiasm serves to emphasize the blind spot in military leadership, considering the consequences.
Oh, I mean, you ought to see it sometime. It's a sight. A big plane like a 52 room. This jet exhaust frying chickens in the barnyard.
Yeah, but has he got a chance?
Has he got a chance? Hell, he's...
Interesting to note how this movie also illustrates the ignorance of history and how we are doomed to repeat it.
Mr. President, we must not allow a mine shaft gap. We were afraid of a doomsday gap.
Because we gotta close the technology gap.
This is presented as a comedy because it is meant to depict the worst of all worst-case scenarios, the hows and whys of humanity rationalizing its own demise, if nudged properly in a particular direction. Even if that direction was recognized as a mistake, the failures within the machine, the egos that built it, the hubris that maintains it, all work relentlessly, inevitably, in one direction.
All right, tell you what you better do, old buddy. You better give Elmo and Charlie a blast and bump everything up to condition red and stand by the blower. I'll get back to you.
What's up?
Nothing. Where's my shorts?
On the floor. Where are you going?
No place. No place.
In a contemporary world of comic book heroes, looking back to Dr. Strangelove reminds all of us of what it was like when movies were made for adults. Adults who had an education, an interest in politics, and the world around them. It assured us that this couldn't happen, because despite the possibility this was only a movie, and a comedy at that, we could trust our own leaders in government and military, because as crazy as it gets, it will never get that crazy, will it? Will it?
I am as sorry as you are, Dimitri. Don't say that you're more sorry than I am, because I'm capable of being just as sorry as you are. So we're both sorry, all right? All right.
You can find this movie at your local library or buy the DVD. This movie is a must-have for your collection, and with distribution and streaming services being what they are these days, who knows where or when this will ever be in a movie theater ever again. Give it a view. Let me know what you think. Thanks, and enjoy.